Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted via in-person and remote means. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so on their televisions by turning to Comcast Channel 8, Verizon Channel 26, or online at northandovercam.org. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the town website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. If the public would like to participate in the public meeting, please email your questions or comments prior to or during the meeting to cpcemails@northandoverma.gov. The question or comment will be provided to the committee before the meeting or be read during the proceedings if received during or shortly before the meeting. Good evening. Welcome to Thursday, February 6th, Community Preservation Committee meeting. Our agenda tonight is to hear from the applicants who've come to meet us. We'll do that first, and we'll check the financial reports, meeting minutes, and adjourn. So I understand that the athletic department has other obligations, so we've agreed to let them do their presentation first. Yeah, yep. That's great.
Hey guys, Steve Nugent, North Andover High School Athletic Director, and I'm with Greg Landry, Supervisor of everything.
Yeah, not really.
Okay.
Director of Personnel and Operations. Nice to be with you guys again. Thank you.
And thank you for allowing us to speak first. We've got a basketball game at the high school right now with Charlestown, and I've got to get back to make sure the place doesn't burn down, and hopefully we... Listen, I appreciate the opportunity to come before you guys and talk about the application we submitted. We're here, and actually as they're filing in, both our varsity tennis coaches are behind us, and some of our tennis players at the high school, and obviously other members of the racket sports in North Andover are pretty excited about this application. So what we've put forward is as an application to completely redo the North Andover High School tennis courts that have not had any maintenance done to them in well over 20 years and are at a point where they're borderline safe, very much a liability in certain cases. And we know that at the addition of adding some of the courts to be pickleball would also add to the inventory that we have as a town for one of the fastest growing sports we have in the country. So, anything you want to add?
No, I just think it's a great use of this money potentially to really invest in the community and make it better for student athletes as well as anyone who wants to play those two games.
And I'd also, just to finalize, Greg reminded me, I think, a couple of years ago we sat before you looking for money to do the trails up behind the Stevens estate. And although our cross-country teams technically only run there 3 times a year for meets, they train there, but if you go up there any day, you see dog walkers, you see many people in the town accessing this huge, amazing asset that we have created for the town. And I look at the tennis courts, even though they're on high school property, and even though our tennis teams would directly benefit from them, I think there's so many people at all hours of the day on those courts using them from a town taxpayer and a town representative. So I think it'd be an unbelievable addition to the asset portfolio for the town of North Andover.
All right, why don't we open it up for questions from the committee?
Steve, have you had any feedback, positive or negative, from the Conservation Commission as to how this redevelopment of the tennis courts are effective?
Yes and no. I think we're really just replacing the footprint that currently exists. So we're working with Gale Associates, who's doing a master plan, has been for several years now, for the town of North Andover directly, and we're coming up into a phase that might impact the high school. So we've been engaged with the Conservation Committee and many other committees that are looking at the plans. The only issue might be that, a few years ago with that massive storm we had, the access to the courts that previously existed was washed out, and now it's fenced in. So in addition to the courts, this would bring access to the courts around that gully, if you will, and cut into the curb and make it a safer access from the opposing sidewalk into the tennis court area.
I can add to that. The town submitted their notice of intent to the Conservation Commission last night, and the tennis court part of it was, the tennis court was part of the project. Overall, it's a redevelopment where they're proposing to install the new tennis courts in the same footprint as the existing tennis courts. They're actually offering an improvement by relocating the entrance, eliminating a wetland crossing to provide access to those tennis courts. So it's a net improvement for this portion of the project. I can say that it looks pretty, this portion of the project looks pretty favorable at this point. So.
You say this portion, is there a portion that's not?
Well, it's a multifaceted project. There's a large field portion, there's a small track and field enhancement, so, you know,
It's, okay.
yeah, it's a multifaceted project.
I understand it's the package that's gone into the Conservation Commission.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gotcha, right.
this
More
is, this is a,
campus-wide, right?
yes, absolutely.
Any
So-
feedback from the neighbors?
I'm sorry?
Any feedback from neighbors?
No, I met with a couple of them. The goal would be to meet with everybody by the time we, come together on May 13th. But, everyone we have talked to who uses the courts, or there's, again, two abutters, has been favorable. I think this is, it's not, we're not looking for something bigger, not moving it in any way, just making it safer and newer.
Is there, Steve, I know we talked about this before, but is there provisions for potential lighting in the future?
Yeah, so it's one of those things, we've gone back and forth about this. Ideally, if we had a magic wand and unlimited resources and, we got confirmation from the abutters that they were in 100% favor, we'd be looking for another $330,000 would provide lighting for the 6 courts. And that would just improve the access and our ability to potentially rent it out and become a revenue stream. For whether it's, there's a couple of local high schools and one local college who's been asking to rent it. We just don't have the ability when we're in season. But so the provision would be with this request would be in light of the conservation concerns, we'd want to have the underground for all the lighting done at the same time, so that if we came forward with another project down the road to add lighting, the underground part would be done, and we wouldn't have to dig back up the ground that was already dug up.
So does that dollar value you have right now include the underground and foundations, or no?
So it's a good question. So we beefed it up a little bit from the initial court, right?
Right.
But we haven't. We're still waiting for a quote on the culvert, the access to the courts. Mm-hmm. So we built in, I think it was up close to $100,000. Believe it or not, the underground lighting is going to be less than $50,000. It should be something small, even smaller than that number is what I was told, but I went high. The access point, as far as taking care of that work, was something that was not included with the original Gale bids, so we tried to beef it up. I guess my question to you would be, once we get those quotes in, is it possible to come back to amend slightly, not the plan, but the amount of money requested?
I would say, like, we've allowed adjustments up until we vote, which is usually we do at the beginning of March. So,
Okay.
not a lot of time, but sometime.
Maybe we want to start high and go low.
Yeah.
Raising is
Yeah.
kind of like, I just feel like it's more transparency if you start high and cut it as opposed to going the other way. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, we've been super sensitive to, I'm happy to resubmit something tonight or tomorrow that includes an additional $75,000 to $100,000. I think that would absolutely cover it, and then we're giving money back, I hope. The fear is, in light of what else is going on in town, I just didn't want to ask we didn't want to ask for too much and have be laughed at.
I think we're all cognizant of that, but I think looking in the future, that putting in the underground now makes a lot more sense than potentially going back later and going back in front of the Conservation Commission and disturbing the area again. Now, it's kind of a no-brainer now.
Okay.
So we can go back to Gail and talk about tightening up that price and seeing if there's anything to add to the number here.
Okay.
Thank you.
How do you want us?
What I see is the estimate 630. So tell me how you got to the 750 number, because I see the Gale estimate at 636.
That was like the additional 100 plus that we thought would take care of the underground as well as this access point, which
Okay.
again, we don't have a price for. It's more of a guesstimate.
Okay.
We got it built in already then?
I'm sorry?
It's already been built in then?
For this 750, we hope it's enough. That's,
Double check.
I had a meeting this morning with Gail, and they hope to have something for us within a week,
Okay.
if that's okay.
So yeah, I would say just amend it, as soon as you can, and,
Okay.
well,
A question, because you raised the issue of the optics, and I'm glad, because that, clearly this year is the year that there's gonna be a lot of focus on that, but is the total amount 750, I just don't remember. What's the?
750.
750. I mean, is that sort of like industry standard for something like this? I mean, I have no idea really, but, 750 over 6 courts, that's like $1.25 a piece, is it? Like, I mean, because I think part of the sell is, look, this is a reasonable price, we're not inflating it, it's not, a Cadillac kind of thing, it's a regular, decent, high-quality thing.
I would say it is based on Gail's experience with this kind of project, with an established structure already, and then to redo what they need to redo. I think that's,
They use past history projects, and also estimating projects.
I don't know how they got to it, but it was in the paper. Methuen, I don't know how much bigger or smaller it is than us, was over $1 million to redo theirs. Yeah.
I have a question about the percentage of usage of the schools versus what would be available to our community members, and how, I mean, this is the beginning of the project, but how you envisioned having an equitable access, given that, the pickleball side is kind of a big popular thing now, and a lot of people might want to take advantage of that through the rec department. So, I mean, I'm personally curious about it.
One of the things, great question, and this is something that, and again, that hopefully the tennis coaches are not shooting me daggers in my back of my head here. But I think having some signage and really identifying for the community when we plan to use it in the spring. We don't have that right now as it currently constituted. In the spring, our teams are using it right after school, so call it 2:30 till about 5:30 every day, every weekday. Sometimes a little bit later. Am I accurate with that, guys? 6 o'clock. So, and earlier in the spring, it's not conducive to really anything being added after it. But that's the way it's existed forever. So it's not something we're making less available to people. I think, to be quite honest, if we've now redone the courts and made them safer and a lot more attractive, I think a lot more people are going to want to use them and be there on the weekends. Typically, there's not a lot of practices or meets over the weekend. In the fall, completely open. Summer, completely open except for some camps that we might run. So again, I think the signage and the ability to communicate with the community to let them know, here's what's going on today or this week, and just keeping people in the loop.
During the school, say May, June, September, October, during the school day, will you let people use it then, or?
People currently use it now,
Yeah,
yes. The only conflict would be if a gym class had a unit on pickleball or tennis and they were down there. But again, that hasn't been an issue to date. This is only my 4th year as the athletic director, and I've not had to run any conflict resolutions for our town and our wellness department yet. Okay.
Is there something unique about this project? So, I mean, you've done other projects recently, such as resurfacing of the track, which gets a lot of public use, resurfacing of the fields that gets a lot of public use, that didn't require CPA funds. Is there something unique about this project that, if I'm reading this correctly, you're looking for CPA to fund this 100%, correct?
Correct.
So is there something different about this project that we should know about?
I mean, part of it's the timing, there's other, we've got a plan in place for the town, right? And the plan is somewhat challenged right now because of the optics and what's going on with the schools and frankly, everybody in town. I want to keep moving forward, because the issue is, if we don't do something with the tennis courts now, they're borderline, like, if teams come, there's been a lot of questions of whether or not they can play on that court or this court, and sometimes we don't have that flexibility. So I'd rather, I don't think this is really a proactive move. It's somewhat of a reactive move, trying to get them done this summer. So I think the uniqueness is maybe the timing of the budget concerns, that, I couldn't rely on other capital improvement funding for this through other sources, and the fact that we're heading into a point of no return pretty soon with these courts, and we've got to do something soon. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's.
The other part of that, I think the town has made a big investment in other recreational projects going on right now. Rick, I forget the number of what the town has invested this year and next year in the 2 phases. So we didn't want to hold up any of those other phases, because the track was so important. It really couldn't be used. And we're trying to get on the fields. We don't have enough fields in town. We just don't. So the town has kind of pushed their projects a little forward to try and get these fields ready. So they're coming to us to try and keep the coaches and the kids have been so patient. Those courts have really taken it. We're very, very fortunate to have a great coaching staff, and they've hung in here on our promises that we're going to get this thing done. And I think it's time. We just can't let it wait anymore.
Yeah, and I would say, I think, getting the grant agreement sort of written up so that we write the public access in, so that everybody can see, that, hey, this is our agreement with the school department. Because if this were a town park, this would be very quick discussion. I think that's the wrinkle, because it is owned by the schools, and there have been cases, and I'm not saying this would happen in this case, but there have been other cases where a school could, put up a tennis court that the CPA paid for, and then decide in 2 years, we need to build a school there. And I totally don't think that it is the situation here, but I think it's better to err on the side of, belt and suspenders, and write it up and say, get the public access sort of written, and get a nice board up there, that you could signage and everything, so people would know exactly what the score is and how it works. Anything else? You can go execute your fast break.
Again, guys, thank you for taking the time to meet with us and putting us up first. Appreciate it.
Okay. So Zach, what other applicants do we have here? And did you have a particular order set, or should we?
No order.
Okay.
Joanna's here from the Historical Society. There's a couple
Yeah.
applications. And then Ron was going to talk about the historic preservation plan implementation. And I included the historic grant pilot program.
Okay.
That John Simon's headed. So.
Okay. All right, great. So why don't we go with Joanne and then Stan, and then we'll keep going.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to come before you this evening to try and put forward our application for the Parson Barnard House and the Johnson Cottage. This project, most of you probably know, we recently installed heat pumps in these 2 historic properties. The Parson Barnard House was built in 1715, one of the oldest houses in town, and we have it as a historic house museum right now, and we have open houses at least 7 times a year open to the public. Johnson Cottage and Founders Hall. Johnson Cottage has a 1-room schoolroom. It was built in 1789, I believe. And we have hundreds of local school children that take part in field trip classrooms, churning butter and weaving with the looms every year. So these are 2 very historic properties that I'd like to continue with the mindset of sustainable stewardship. As I said, we've installed heat pumps in both properties, and insulation is kind of the final piece of this. So my request is for both properties to have insulation foam board insulation and weather stripping. In both properties, it's the most delicate way to add insulation as opposed to spray foam in historic buildings. And the company that I ended up choosing to go with have a lot of experience with historic homes. Unfortunately, they didn't meet the requirements for the mass save rebates, which is a standard rebate that we could get, but I did speak with at least 4 other vendors, and none of them I felt comfortable moving forward with this project because they didn't have a lot of experience with historic homes. So that's the reason why I decided to put a request in for these 2 applications.
Thanks for the update on the mass save, because I was curious about that.
Yeah.
It's too bad, it's too bad you couldn't found,
Yeah.
have found a trusted vendor. But I appreciate the effort.
Thank you.
You can't spray foam, or you don't want to?
No, so a couple of these other vendors with the Mass Save program did say, oh yeah, we can put spray foam in, but then after talking to other vendors, they said, no, don't do that because the spray foam insulation actually expands and contracts depending on the temperature, which would cause irreparable harm to the exterior of the walls.
You also have to put holes in to do spraying in too.
So you've gotten written contract bids for both
Yes,
projects?
I've got written proposals. Here, the company is called Green Cocoon. They're based, I think, in Newburyport or Salisbury, and I've got a couple of references too from other buildings that they've insulated, and I was very happy with the response from them. So
What size insulation board was it? Was it a couple of layers or is it a single layer?
I think it's single layer.
Single layer.
And mostly it's going to go around the foundation walls in the basement, and then in the attic on both properties, and less on the exterior vertical walls. At the Parson Barnard house, we need some additional work to fill in some gaps in the chimney, and then in the Founders Hall, we also have this beautiful skylight, which has at least 2 feet of distance between the lower levels of the glass and then the higher level. So that was kind of a trickier problem to address and put insulation in. So that's why the cost for the Johnson Cottage and Founders Hall is more expensive than the Parson Barnard house.
Okay, any other questions? All right, great, thank you.
Great, thank you so much.
And thanks for engaging early. I think it makes it easy. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Limpert, are you coming tonight or
No, not me.
not you?
Today.
Okay,
I'm next week.
all right. Okay, Mr. Rudis, would you like to?
Sure. Okay, so the town is in the midst of, hopefully in the final stages of finalizing a historical preservation plan. So we've got a draft that we've been reviewing for a while. So what the Historical Commission would like to do is to try to get a little bit of a head start on those items that we believe will be high priority in the plan. So there are two items in the application. One is for design guidelines, document preparation. So one focus of the preservation plan is community outreach and engagement. So for example, encouraging the appropriate treatment of historic buildings, in particular in historic neighborhoods that don't currently have official historic preservation designations. So the goal is to have a set of guidelines that would raise the interest and the awareness of property owners in the history and the character of their properties, and to provide them with some technical information and support in terms of the appropriate treatment. One example where these guidelines would have been useful is the recent renovation at 48 Water Street, right at the corner of Water Street and Merrimack, that houses the cupcake store. They did a beautiful job there, but they did it all on their own, did their own research. It'd be nice if we had guidelines for other property owners that were doing similar properties, so to be a little proactive to provide them with that.
It's very interesting, because I think that dovetails very nicely with the thing that I've been talking about, because what you've got is, this is the book of stuff, it stimulates interest, and then you can give people a small amount of money to do the project. I think it actually ties together really well. Yeah.
Now, let me just mention on both of these items, we've thrown a number out there for consulting costs. We really have no idea how much they're going to cost, but I think the numbers we put out there would be enough to help us get started. The second item, which there's a typo in, it's a historic house data collection, not date collection. So the Mass Historical Commission has a inventory of historic assets, and that's the primary means of recording information on historic resources in Massachusetts. And the inventory is used by historians, students, property owners, journalists, et cetera. Inclusion in that inventory places no restrictions on the property or its use. It's just a recognition of the historical value of the property. MACRIS is an online database which is compiled primarily from that inventory. So two of the recommendations in the preservation plan were to inventory the neighborhoods south of downtown and Machine Shop Village that were developed before 1940. Essentially the area from Main Street south to Mass Ave, and then inventory the historic districts north of the Davison-Furber area in the vicinity of High Street, and also the mill-related residents around the old Stevens Mill, such as around Mill Pond and Phillips Court. So basically, it's a research and documentation process where we would find a consultant that would go through and do the research, write up the documents, and do the applications to the Mass Historic Commission to get these in the MACRIS database. So that's essentially the two projects in that application.
Is the current consultant, is that something that he'd be interested, since he's got familiarity with the town now?
I guess it's possible. I guess two things. One is they're located up in Maine, so I'm not sure how much time they would spend down here. And I don't know if we'd want to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest since they're writing the preservation plan that are recommending these actions.
What's your sense of how many properties
Well,
we're
can you-
talking about?
We should all come a little closer to the
Sorry.
microphone. Yes,
Your
ma'am.
sense of how many properties here?
No, we don't have a sense. If I had to guess, my guess would be there's probably anywhere between 50 to 100 properties in North Andover that could end up in the inventory that aren't there now.
Thank you.
Well, what would be the purpose of identifying these properties?
So there is one direct purpose that I could think of is that it helps with grant applications. So there's a number of items in the historical preservation plan that are going many items that are going to require additional funding, hiring consultants. So it would help in the area of getting grants from the Mass Historical Commission.
But it wouldn't obligate them to develop or improve in,
You mean the property owners?
yeah.
Yeah, there's no obligation on the property at all and no restrictions on the property. Yeah, it's not like a registration with the National Historic Registry. It's sort of a recognition of or a verification of the historical significance of the property.
So what would the grants be for? Typically, I'm just ignorant of your process, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to get filled in.
So, right now, there are over 60 recommendations in the draft historic preservation plan. There's probably, I expect when it's completed, there'll probably be another 20 or so. Most of all of them require some action that probably falls either with town staff or beyond the staffing that we have for the Historical Commission. So any of those historical preservation recommendations could probably require funding, and that could be eligible for grants. I don't have the document in front of me, but
Is it possible we could get a copy of the draft? Is that something that's open for grabs, or?
I thought you had sent one out.
Oh, maybe you did.
But I think
yeah.
it didn't get
I
approved,
could
so-
certainly send it out.
Yeah.
And
But you know, it's so large.
Is
You have
it?
to find a Google type
Put it on,
drive.
yeah, put it on the Google Drive.
yeah, I could put it in
Yeah.
Google Drive and
Okay.
link to it. Yes, and in particular, the planning board should probably get a copy of it if you haven't, because
Yeah, probably, yeah.
there's quite a few recommendations in there that assume actions on the planning
Yeah.
board, of the planning board.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll send that out.
A point of interest, I actually read an article recently that there was a project years ago in England to basically inventory every property in England. And it took them like 30 or 40 years, but they actually did it. So it's actually, you know, in some respects, we're following on to something that is a tradition, I mean, which is actually kind of interesting.
Are you familiar with this past summer, and I don't know if it's still going on, Zach might know about it, is that where they were inventorying all the town trees, or trees that were over a certain amount, age? Are you familiar with it? I've heard about it. Yeah, so that
Who's doing that?
they hired an outside group to come in, and they went every street, walked every street, and marked out every tree.
So, who hired?
The town, it was on a grant.
The Conservation Department.
Oh, okay.
It was on a grant.
No,
I just thought it was interesting.
One in the old center,
Yeah. And they were at a tree out in front of my house, and I'm like, what are these people doing walking around my tree? And they're measuring it, and they're doing all this stuff. And
Yeah, I mean, I think the trickiest part is to figuring out if it falls within the scope of the CPA, because it's the Community Preservation Act, and just because we're not, we're not like directly acquiring something. So I think we should get the town council involved. I think eventually we would, but.
I think we're probably okay because if you go back in time, when we did the Machine Shop Village original work there, a large part of that was basically a survey and overview of the neighborhood and everything. So I think it does sort of broadly fit, but fair game. I mean, we should vet everything just to be safe, particularly this year, so.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay. And John, do you want to talk about your proposal?
Yeah. You know, we've had a couple people in over the last couple of years that have had properties and are excited and willing to do things and maybe have already done things. And to this point, we haven't been able to offer them any sort of possibilities of direct support. So my idea was to have a small grant program for private homeowners, because if you think about it, we've invested a lot of money in historical preservation for town facilities. I mean, this right here is a good example of that. The Historical Society, which is quasi-public, I think, it's, you know, it's not part of the municipality, but it's a public trust. But we've never done anything really very much for people who own private properties. And with private properties, it's obviously more complicated because you're bestowing a benefit to private owners. But I thought it was a good idea to be done in scale. And Tim directed me to the two places in the state that have actually done something similar. It's Cambridge and Springfield. And their programs are on like a dramatically different scale. And basically a couple of magnitudes higher, like they throw $500,000 or more in it, and they'll give people $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. And it's as, frankly, for those projects, it's as much a housing thing as it is historical preservation, but it like ends up being a twofer. So there were some interesting things from those communities, but I think it was a little bit, much bigger. So how do we do something on a much smaller scale? Now, one of the things that is like an important part of it, is a critical part of it, is that technically there has to be a public benefit involved. If you give money to any private organization, you got to get a public benefit. It's in significant cases, like we did with the church, we got a historical preservation restriction. So that's, direct quid pro quo. If you give money out, say $3,000, $5,000, it's a little bit harder because people are not going to do a historical preservation restriction on a property for that little money. So you have to think of other benefits to the community. It might be an open house once or twice a year. It may be people coming in and presenting to students. It could be a lot of different things. I mean, this is where the imagination comes in. And this is where, I mean, it's a new thing. It's, the thought that I had was put $25,000 in. We'd have the managed by the Historical Commission because it is owned by the town, as opposed to originally I said, hey, maybe the Historical Society. But it kind of makes more sense, and we could get input from the Historical Society and other groups, but basically you have around the funding, maybe once or twice a year, people come in and they pitch the project, and the Historical Commission decides which projects to fund, and we need an explicit set of criteria of how you would make the decisions, again, grant agreements, how do you parcel the money out, all those sorts of things, and the follow-up. So there is a fair amount of work to do, but I just think given it's a small amount of money, treat it as a pilot and see if it works, if it generates any interest, and so forth. So that's basically the idea.
I thought what Ron was talking about dovetails very nicely with what you're talking about, and vice versa. And it seems, Springfield and Cambridge have done it. Theirs is a lot more detailed income requirements, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure if the Historical Society wants to get into the monitoring and commission, and get into monitoring and checking people's 1040s to make sure that they're qualified to do that kind of thing. But I like the idea of this pilot program because we had a clear example. Someone's put their own sweat equity in. All she was looking for was cost of materials. So that was a good example. So,
And if we can save a fence that's been there for 100 years, or something of that sort, that is, we've all seen and driven by since we were born, I think it would be great. So.
I don't know if you guys looked in the Springfield and the Cambridge programs. Do they talk about how they handle the public access part of.
Well, the interesting thing there is, as best I can tell, they don't. They have an agreement, like, you know, because they're putting so much money into the properties, if, like, a person moves, like, within 2 years or something and makes profit, they claw back the profit. But there's nothing about public access, there's nothing about preservation. It's actually kind of shocking to me, because after I got a lecture from Stewart about how there has to be a public benefit and how you need a conservation restriction, they don't have them. That's that kind of surprised me. For all the administration it has, and all the controls it has, there actually is no direct quid pro quo. I think, you know, implicitly is you can't tear the house down or anything like that. That's really what it comes down to. So I think what they're trying to do with those programs is they're trying to preserve neighborhoods historically. And it's not a bad idea, but it is a lot of money and a lot of administration, so.
Well, those are fairly sizable cities, so.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that a project like that would be, would be set up in a much different way with a different approach. This is interesting. Because the grants that you're proposing are small, I'm not sure, like, with criteria for potential applicants, what the motivation would be, other than like small improvements to a fence or something in the house or on the property, and how, like, what kind of agreement could be made if it's even enforceable. So if if someone wanted to do this and then like 2 years late, down the road, they don't feel like opening up their house anymore, like where,
Well, yeah, I mean,
for example.
you're right, there's lots of things, and that's why sort of I wanted to start this thing small bore,
Yep.
because, what's gonna happen is you'll find things as you go along, and, yeah, I mean, you could ask for, what I would envision is ultimately there is some level of agreement, but you're right, if all you're giving them is $2,000, after 3 years, if they said they don't want to do it anymore, if that's the case, what are you going to do? Go after them for $2,000? I mean, it's.
I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate
No,
because there's like, we don't know why
We don't, and
someone
that's
would
why,
want, like,
kinda-
if they have a really beautiful, well-kept, historical home, they might not really
I mean,
wanna do
like, one
something
of the
like that.
things you can do is you could say, every applicant has to come in 2 years or this or that or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of things like, one of the things we do on the planning board is sometimes on like some of the commercial properties that we, are doing a site plan review, we spend a lot of time figuring out all the terms to make sure that we understand how it's going to be in operation. And at some point we say we can't go any further in that. So we say, we're going to have you come back in 2 years to make sure you're doing what we thought you were going to do. And if you're not, we're going to make you fix it. So it's something like that, I think, yeah.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Great idea. And I agree, it makes sense to start small and then,
I mean, interestingly enough, we tried, like, on the housing side, it was probably 20 years ago, with some small grants to homeowners, like, kind of a similar concept to seniors and stuff like that, or, throwing somebody a down payment, and they tried it once, and kind of like, the problem was, how do you differentiate between one person versus another? And so they didn't do it again, but, you learn by doing it is really what it comes down to.
Okay. Great. Okay, I think that's that. In the financial reports, we have any questions? Zach and I met, and we're talking about, we're trying to get the documentation together so that we can close out some more projects, in the next couple meetings. It doesn't take long. Usually it's just, we're just running down to go back to the project applicant and say, like, what's happening with this, and get confirmation, and then we can come to you with a list of projects to close. So,
I just had a couple. And I really missed the opportunity I meant to ask Steve. There's $3,500 still left in his bucket for the North Andover High School cross-country course. I was just wondering.
They have to do a sign. They haven't done a sign.
The signage. There you go. That's good. And the other one is just an administrative thing, is knocking the Stevens Memorial Library north out of the open space, or is that open, was that open space? As far as the the Stevens Memorial Library dash north is what is categorized. And it's called open space, and it's in the open space bucket.
Oh, the north lawn, yeah, that's.
The north lawn, is that open space, or is that, okay, okay. Never mind.
That was the design for,
Wait a minute, is it?
yeah,
That was a design.
that was the design.
But not the construction.
Not the construction.
Okay. That's all I had.
That sign on the cross country is probably my problem.
3,500.
3,500.
Yeah, that's probably my problem. Running the site.
Not for a little, small silence and partying.
I can talk to Steve about that.
I was, no big deal.
Yeah, I've been talking to Coach Varney about it too, so.
We didn't have time to put that in the design to get it on.
Okay, and then we have the meetings from January 9th, meeting minutes from January 9th. I have any motions relative to the meeting minutes of the January 9th meeting?
A second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And I'm, yeah, I was there, I guess, yeah. I know I missed one, but who was?
Sorry. I'll work on that.
Okay, any additional motions?
Are we, I put on the agenda, is everyone good for next week? Next
Yeah.
Thursday? And then there's another one scheduled March 6th.
Yeah.
That should be the last review meeting. I just want to make sure.
We're at 7.
Because next week, I know the schools are off. I don't know if that affects anybody.
I mean, how many of your kids are still in high school, guys?
I'm taking my grandkids away.
Oh, there you go.
I am here next week and out the 6th, or trip the 6th, but should be, we should be good. And the 6th, do we have voting on the 6th on the projects, or?
I guess there should, I mean, so right now, we have the select board presentation scheduled for the 24th.
Okay.
So then in our March meeting's on the 6th, so I guess voting would have to come then. But there's also a few projects that would have to be reviewed. So I don't know if it's normal, if typical, if we can have a few applicants come in on the 6th and then later in that meeting, vote on
Yeah.
all of them together. Or if we'd have to schedule a
Because
meeting the week after the 6th.
we had the 20th too, because I looked at the schedule again today. We have the 20th
Well, then that could be the
on
review,
the-
that could be the
on
voting.
the book, on the tape. I don't want to I know it's a busy time of year for everybody. My preference would be to, because I don't know that we've gotten commitments from everybody to be here next week. My preference would be to vote on the 20th, because I do feel like it's better to hear the projects, and then it also gives us a chance to put a spreadsheet together and say like, okay, we've heard from everybody, here's about how much we want to give out, and I like that, a little bit of distance between that. So we could meet on the 20th and the 6th and hear the final projects, and then we can all agree to make our decisions on the 20th, and then that gives us enough time to turn around for the select board presentation. Does that sound workable?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Great, thank you. Thanks for bringing that up, Ted.
So how do you, the 20th of
March.
March?
Yeah.
Vote on the 20th.
So we're going to keep the meeting next week.
Yeah, we'll keep the 20th, we'll keep the 6th, and then we'll vote on the 20th of March.
Okay.
6. It's all on my calendar already.
Okay. Yeah, and that seems, because we've got 4, we have 13 applications, we had 4 tonight, so it would be tough to hear 9 projects in one night.
I had to do some reshuffling because last
Mhm.
year canceled.
Yeah. Okay. All right, any further motions?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.